Hello there everybody. Today, I'll be taking a look at the Raidmax Alpha RGB PC case. So, is this the case to buy for your next build? I guess we'll find out. So starting off, thanks to Raidmax for sending this case over for review. The Alpha costs $72 to $75 depending on which color you get, and the case comes in one of two colors, either black or white, and I have the white one for my review. Opening up the box, you'll find the case protected by two stiff pieces of foam that adequately protected the case during transport. Once you open up the case and go into the hard drive bays, you'll find a white box that has a bag with all the necessary screws, the remote for controlling the RGB lights that is also magnetic and can be mounted on the outside of the case, and a helpful user manual that gives a case layout, installation instructions, and labels all of these screws as well as the buttons on the remote. As far as specs go, the case is made with steel and plastic and has the dimensions of 450 by 211 by 465 millimeters. There's support for CPU coolers up to 175 millimeters in height, and there's support for GPUs up to 390 millimeters in length. There are also two 3.5-inch drive bays that also support 2.5-inch drives, and there are another two 2.5-inch drive slots, and there's one 5.25-inch drive bay up front. The case supports mini ITX, MATX, and ATX motherboards, has 7 expansion slots, allows for up to 3 120mm or 2 140mm fans up front, allows for up to 2 140mm fans or 2 120mm fans up top, and comes with an included 120mm fan in the back. Overall, as for the looks of the exterior, you're getting a nice boxy look that has some angles up front, and that mesh all around doesn't look too bad either. Taking a look at the front of the case, we see the mesh-looking front panel that's actually closed off, and there's a small Raidmax logo on the bottom. Here we also see the slot for the 5.25-inch bay, and on the sides we see holes for ventilation. On one side of the case there are the power and reset buttons along with activity LEDs, and on the other side there are the two USB 3 ports and two audio ports. This is a little but inconvenient issue of the case, because if you keep your PC against one side of your desk or even facing against you on one side, you lose easy access to either the power and reset buttons or your front panel ports, so I'm not a fan of the front layout. I also would have preferred that at least one fan be included up front, as the only included fan with this case is the 120 in the rear. In terms of the sides of the case, the windowed side panel allows you to see almost all of the interior of the case, as opposed to other cases where the side panel window cuts off at a certain point. Obviously, the other side panel is completely closed off, and both side panels can be easily removed with the included thumb screws. At the back, we see the 7 expansion slots that have a thumb screw removable holder, and you can see the included 120mm fan, which can get fairly loud during intense workloads. On top of the case, we see the magnetic dust filter that can be removed with ease. Because of the lack of any solid top cover, CPU fan noise is especially audible during demanding tasks, but still this makes the top cover very easy to clean if you want to mount any fans up there. On the bottom of the case there are the 4 plastic feet, the removable PSU dust filter, and some screws. If we move inside the case and behind the PSU shroud, we can see that those screws are used for removing the hard drive cage, which also requires another 4 screws above it to be removed in order to fully take the drive cage out. This cage provides the only 3.5-inch drive support in the entire case, so if you have a larger than standard power supply or can't fit your cables well enough, you'll need to remove the 2 hard drive bays or the cage entirely. As far as the rest of the rear side goes, we can see the back of the motherboard tray, areas for routing cables, front panel connectors, and 2 SSD mounting brackets that are removable. Moving to the other side of the case, it's clear to see how open the case actually is, given the lack of hard drive bays in the main section. The only thing that's really sticking out is the 5.25-inch bay, and that can be removed completely anyways to make room for a radiator. Even then, with the all-black motherboard tray, shroud, and mounts, the inside of the case looks very clean and there are conveniently placed pockets and holes for routing cables easily. There's also slots for if you want your SSDs to be seen through the side panel window, giving the case some great SSD options. Looking at the front of the case from the inside, you can see the tall LED strip that faces the front of the case, and this is the only strip that is used for case illumination. Alright, so you've seen the case, but what's it actually like to build a PC in the alpha? Well, the process as a whole was mostly easy. Mounting the full MATX board assembly took no time at all, getting the GPU in there was a breeze, and thanks to the amount of room in the front, there was no problem with connecting any wires. And even though my Gigabyte GTX 970 had a length of around 311mm, the case could handle it with no issue thanks to that very open interior. As far as cable management in the front goes, there's plenty of space in that side opening to allow for the necessary 24-pin, 6-pin, 8-pin, SATA, and USB 3 connectors, so the result on that side was pretty clean. Moving behind the motherboard tray, this is where things get interesting. Resting the Corsair CX750 into place was a little annoying as it must be mounted on some blocks that are in the case in order to line it up with the bracket, but that wasn't such a hassle to deal with. The trickiness comes in when you mount the hard drives alongside the PSU. Now if you use a larger than standard power supply, you must remove the drive cage entirely, which would be fine except there is no other place to put any hard drives should you use them in your build. Plus, the CX750's non-modular cables are right up there against the hard drive cage, putting some strain on those cables. The lack of overall space in this area doesn't help matters either. So to attempt to hide some cables, I mounted my single 3.5-inch hard drive on the top drive bay and removed the bottom one so I could have at least a little more room for storing and routing cables. So as far as options go for managing cables with a standard non-modular power supply, you'd have to be willing to either put up with a little bit of stress being put on the cables, or you'd have to remove the drive cage or base to make room for the cables, which is a bit of a pain to deal with either way in an instance where you might need to add a drive in the future. Moving on to a pretty cool feature of this case being the LED strip. When it's lit up, it can be clearly seen through the front mesh, and because it's a single strip in the middle, you can see a lot of light in the middle of the mesh, but there's also a fair bit of spreading across the entire front panel. The inside of the case gets well lit with the LED strip despite it only facing the front of the case. If you have lighter colored components, the LED colors will definitely be more prominent, and if there were an included white fan instead of an included gray one, the lights would be even more highlighted in the back of the case. As far as control over the LEDs go, you can select static colors from the presets or scroll through other static colors, and you can select modes such as breathing and flashing, both of which can be done with one or more than one color, and you can also adjust the speed of the breathing and flashing from the remote. There's also a full color spectrum mode that smoothly cycles through the colors that can also be speed adjusted. All modes can also have their brightness adjusted, making the color options very good overall. But changing between light modes can be annoying when scrolling through them using the remote, as it can take some time before you find exactly the right mode you want. Unless you just want static, in which case you can just click a color button on the remote and you're good to go. So overall, I would give the Raidmax Alpha a 6 out of 10. This case is definitely one that first and foremost looks good inside and out, has solid features and support for various build scenarios, has a good workspace around the motherboard area, and provides solid case illumination with the RGB LED. But the case also has a few issues, such as the limited space for the PSU cables and hard drives, the bad front panel layout, and the remote light controls. But in the end, the build worked out well, with not a whole lot of other issues along the way during building. So for your next build, if you have the need for more than a few 3.5-inch drive bays, if you don't use a modular power supply or are using a power supply that is larger than standard, or if you don't like having a case that will definitely stand out, this isn't the thing for you. But for those who want a case that is unique and don't require much 3.5-inch storage space, and for those who have a modular standard power supply or don't mind dealing with the lack of room for cables as long as the final build looks clean, then this might just be the RGB case for your next build. If you enjoyed, then leave a like. If you want to see some more, then click that subscribe button. Of course, thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys later.